Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Fantasy Baseball. I am John Cuh, and I am joined by our new host for this podcast. He was just on the pod last week, so he's probably still familiar to a bunch of guys. But just welcome to Patrick Fitzgerald for taking up the hosting spot after Lee had to leave. So welcome, Patrick. How's the first week of baseball going for you?
Thank you, John. Looking forward to doing the podcast with you this year. First week's good. It's just nice to have baseball on all the time. Can't complain.
Yeah, I was at a restaurant yesterday, and they had MLB Network on. And it was just like it was just nice to watch highlights. It was fun to see how things are going across the league. Obviously, we're only a weekend, so there's some weird stuff. Like for example, Atlanta doesn't have a single win, just super weird. The Blue Jays are the number one team in the AL East. The AL Central just collectively sucks. Um, it's obviously just one week into the season, but nonetheless, I think there's still a lot of fun stuff that has happened in the past couple games.
Yeah, it's definitely prime overreaction season. A lot of surprising things going on. Can't say the AL Central being bad is one of them,
It's
unfortunately.
true.
It's kind of par for the course these days.
Yeah, I think Jeff Passan came from the top rope today, just kind of posting that every team in the AL Central is tied at 2-4. Of course, my Twins are now 2-5 because they lost to the Stros today. Everyone else had an off day, so um, the AL Central is still awful. So that's fun. How are the O's doing? And have you been able to catch a game?
Yeah, I was able to get to the game yesterday. First one of the year. Unfortunately, got shut out by Garrett Crochet, but he's gonna do that to you sometime. So we're 3-4 so far. Should be getting Gunnar Henderson back tomorrow, which is gonna be a real nice jolt to the lineup. So, I think they're gonna be in the thick of it in the AL East. I don't think they're gonna dominate, but it should be a fun year.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, Garrett Crochet just signing that huge extension
Huge.
with the Red Sox. Nice to see the Red Sox spending money. I think there's been maybe a bad taste in a lot of Red Sox fans since they traded Mookie. But it's nice to see that they're kind of investing in the team at least, and especially in a division that doesn't necessarily feel wide open, but it feels like anyone could really compete, maybe except for the Tampa Bay Rays.
Yeah, I think that it is pretty wide open, especially with Cole and Heel going down for the Yankees. I mean, they definitely have the strongest roster, but now it is pretty up in the air. And yeah, the Red Sox, rich tradition, been a rough last couple of years, so it's nice to see some buy in there.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we are back to our regular season episode. So we are going to be going through our normal, just uh, our normal in this episode, we are back in regular season mode, so we're just going to back to our normal procedure of just covering news, notes around baseball. We'll recap the hitter and pitcher performances from this last week. Thanks, of course, to the writers over at Pitcherlist, and of course, at the end, we've got some streamer recommendations at the end of the show because even if it's only the second week of fantasy baseball, you'll still want to maybe stream a couple times. But before we get into it, just a reminder that you can follow our podcast on Twitter at thisweekpl. If you've got a fantasy baseball question, you want to send it via email, you can reach us at thisweekplpod@gmail.com. Lastly, make sure you subscribe to or follow the podcast on whatever streaming platform that you listen to. Again, we're on all of them: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, we're on YouTube now. Wherever you listen to your podcast, make sure you follow us and leave a 5-star review if you enjoy the show. We are about to get into our first injury recap. There's a lot here, frankly, because a lot of stuff happened on opening day. But thankfully, not a lot of injuries happened the past couple days. But just going through a couple important injury list placements. Josh Young had some neck spasms, but he's hopeful for a minimum stay. Should probably return late next week. Max Scherzer, not a great welcome to his new team in Toronto. He's dealing with some issues with his lat and his thumb. He got a cortisone injection. Should be throwing either Thursday or Friday. We'll see how that goes with him and if he's going to be able to get back onto the mound. Josh Lowe on, I believe it was opening day, basically was running down the first base line after getting a hit and strained his oblique. He did say it was a little bit worse than the oblique strain that he got last year that caused him to miss 2 months. So kind of unfortunate for Josh, and I think there was a lot of hope for him to be really good this season. But unfortunately, that it's not starting out super well. Nick Gonzalez, ankle fracture. He's not in the 60-day, but he's likely going to be out a couple months. There's not really much to talk about here unless you're in a really deep league. Nick Gonzalez is just probably not going to be on your fantasy teams. Reynaldo Lopez basically had an awful first start, and then turns out he's got some issues with his shoulder. He actually underwent surgery and doesn't have a return timetable right now, but he is placed on the 60-day IL. Colton Cowser, unfortunately, had a broken thumb, so he's now out for 6 to 8 weeks. Gleyber Torres, with his new team in Detroit, is also suffering a left oblique strain. We'll see how long he is out for. And then Jared Jones, who was initially placed on the 15-day IL, has now been moved to the 60-day IL with that sprained UCL. Super unfortunate for Jones. Obviously, a lot of people were hoping for a lot from him this season. But yeah, that it seems like the injury bug has hit him super unfortunately. So, yeah, any thoughts about these IL placements, Patrick, or kind of any notable names that you think we should be caring about?
Yeah, it's interesting. It seems like quite a few serious injuries here. A couple of ones that they hope are short, in terms of Young and maybe Scherzer and maybe Gleyber Torres, but we're looking at quite a few long-term absences here. With Reynaldo Lopez, he's a guy who it felt like he was a little bit of a ticking time bomb, so it's not super surprising to see him go down, but it is unfortunate after such a big breakout last year. Yeah, Jared Jones, high upside, right? You got to hope for the best with rehabbing a sprained UCL, but I mean the track record of guys doing that is really spotty. So he might have to go under the knife before the season's over. So yeah, there's just a lot of uncertainty here. I think these guys, and a couple of them come into new teams too. Max Scherzer and Gleyber Torres going on the IL right away. It's just a bummer to see guys hoping to make headway with their new team going down. But yeah, I'm hopeful that, Young and Scherzer will hopefully be back soon. Keep an eye on how they're progressing and, maybe you can stash them on your IL spot or in leagues where you don't have an IL, once guys are getting close to a return, try to scoop them up or bid on them to add them to your team. Cause, I think almost all these guys could be contributors once they're healthy, except for maybe, maybe only Nick Gonzalez in deeper formats, like you said. And his injury was a weird one. I think he hit a home run and he broke his ankle, on
Yeah.
a step or first couple of steps. Just super unfortunate.
Yeah, I believe this was on opening day. I got really excited because I have Nick Gonzalez on one of my dynasty teams.
Mm,
I didn't start him because you don't need to start Nick Gonzalez, but I was like, oh,
right.
he had a homer. Maybe he's actually going to be good this season. And then, nope, he broke his ankle. So, unfortunate there. On to some maybe more positive news. We've got some players who are hoping to return from the IL soon. Like you mentioned, Gunnar Henderson should be returning either to Thursday or Friday. He did hit 2 homers during his AAA rehab, so seems like everything's good for him. Sean Murphy of Atlanta, who's dealing with some issues with his ribs. He's currently rehabbing in AAA, but he did homer in his first game back in his rehab assignment. So hopefully he is back soon. Spencer Strider, of course, coming back from Tommy John, made his first AAA rehab start on Saturday. Had 6 strikeouts and 3 innings on 60 pitches. So things seem to be looking good for him. Obviously, he needs to be stretched out a little bit more, only on 60 pitches, but he does look really good right now. And specifically for those two, I'll mention the next guy. Ronald Acuna is still not cleared for any sort of cutting or outfielder drills. They're still being really safe with him. But for those 3 guys, Sean Murphy, Spencer Strider, and then Acuna, like I mentioned, the Atlanta is currently, I think they're 0-7. They basically just have not won a game. How big is it to get all 3 of those guys back for that team?
Yeah, that's going to be a huge shot in the arm, Strider and Acuna specifically. I think, Murphy's a good player. They have Drake Baldwin as a really nice option holding it down right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, Strider's going to be a huge shot in the arm for the rotation, especially with Lopez just going down. They had the spot start Bryce Elder yesterday. I think it's really encouraging to see Strider already at 60 pitches. It tells me that he's really not too far away. And then, Acuna, we obviously know what he's capable of. He's not going to run as much. I think he's made that pretty clear, but he's still a great hitter and he's going to be right up top of that lineup. And they're going to need him too because he's going to be replacing Mr. Profar, who just got popped for some PEDs. So,
Yeah, it is really unfortunate for Atlanta because it hasn't been like they've been uncompetitive. I was watching the game on Wednesday when they were facing the Dodgers, and they literally, they were ahead for a good chunk of the game. Rice Iglesias kind of fell apart in the 8th and 9th inning, ended up giving up a walk-off homer to Shohei Ohtani. But it's not a team that's like, getting the breaks being off them. Like they're still decent. They just aren't getting the wins right now.
Yeah, yeah, it's got to be frustrating as an Atlanta fan. I can't imagine.
Yeah. All right, moving on. Zach Neto, shortstop for the Angels. He's been dealing with some shoulder stuff, but uh, the expectation was he's going to be back within the first month of the season. He did start his AAA rehab earlier this week, so we'll see how that goes for him. Brandon Woodruff, who's also dealing with some shoulder issues, he did complete a couple simulated games to come before officially going on a rehab assignment. Did get up to 51 pitches, so hopefully he is available to return. I think with Woodruff, for me, he's kind of a guy who you'll have on your team, and if he just does really well, awesome. And as soon as he basically gets his next injury, he's just droppable. I think. I have him on a couple teams. I think it's a mix of teams with IL spots and without IL spots. So I'm kind of holding on to hope that Woodruff comes back soonish, maybe in the next couple of weeks. But as soon as I think I see another shoulder injury, I think Woodruff is not really worth holding on to anymore. He's probably droppable.
Yeah, it was a pretty invasive surgery that he had, and missed all of last year. So I think I would agree with your line of thinking there. I have
Mhm.
Neto and Woodruff stashed in the same RotoWire online
Yeah.
championship league, so it's nice to see. I think April is realistic for both of them, so
Mhm.
that's not too long of a hold. I can stomach that for sure.
Right, exactly. Like you'll still get, I mean, assuming health, at least for Neto, right? You'll get probably 5 months of production out of him.
Mhm.
With Woodruff, it's just going to be a complete uh, question mark. Just don't know how long he's going to stay healthy for, but hopefully it's long enough to you know be positive, and most likely we weren't investing really high draft picks on him, so the return on investment for him probably shouldn't be too bad.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Andrew Abbott, for a pitcher for the Reds, he's dealing with some shoulder issues. Did pitch 5.2 innings in AAA, so he's probably gearing up for a return. I'm not really sure what the state of the Reds rotation is, but Abbott was a big part of the rotation last season. 138 innings, 9 quality starts. Not in amazing numbers, 3.72 ERA, 1.3 WHIP, but he was certainly serviceable for that team. Yeah, what's your opinion on Andrew Abbott? Is he a guy that people should be thinking about picking up in fantasy leagues in anticipation of his return, or do you think it's more of a wait and see how he does when he initially comes back?
Yeah, I would say definitely wait and see outside of deep leagues or NL only. He's a guy who he will get innings, assuming health. But the quality is a little bit iffy, especially just Great American is just such a tough place to pitch. He's not a guy who typically strikes out a lot of hitters, and the whip, is usually not great. Usually 1-3 or pushing even higher. So I think that he's a guy who, yeah, I'd like to see what he looks like first before adding him to most of my teams, especially coming off of an injury. Although he's already thrown 5 2/3. I do feel like some of these injuries are just we don't have enough space for all the guys that we want to keep. So we're going to
Mm-hmm.
say that someone's, they're just a little slow building up. We'll put them on the IL and then hopefully
Yep.
they're ready, when we're ready to make a decision in a week or two.
Right. Yeah. All right, Alexis Diaz, his teammate and the closer for the Reds, did begin a rehab assignment in High A. He's dealing with some hamstring issues. Currently, Emilio Pagan is the closer in Cincinnati. I can speak from experience that that's not a very good situation. But yeah, Alexis Diaz coming back will probably be pretty huge for that team, just being able to have his talent. Although he is kind of streaky too. Like he's not exactly a shutdown closer like his brother, obviously, at Evan Diaz. But he is still someone who, once he's healthy and back, he's probably on a fantasy roster.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it sounds like Francona might make him earn the rollback, which I don't hate because
Mm-hmm.
he did really struggle last year. He's usually a pretty easy fade for me just because there's just so many base runners. He feels like he's constantly walking the tightrope out there, especially
Yeah.
in a tough ballpark. Like, same thing for Abbott, right? So I think that he could get the role right back because the Reds don't have other dominant options. They have some potentially competent options, but
Mm-hmm.
he's definitely going to be in the mix once he's ready to go.
Yeah. All right. One really fun name, Lance McCullers Jr., who feels like has just been injured for years at this point. Did have a rehab start in Double A last Saturday. Um, he is coming back from elbow surgery. Honestly, I don't know what to expect out of McCullers. I don't even know if he necessarily immediately gets a spot. with the Rangers. No, sorry, with the with the Astros, mainly because you look at the rest of the rotation there, and it's like fine. Um, you pitchers 4 and 5, Ronald Blanco, Hayden Wisniewski. I don't think the Astros are in any rush to get McCullers back up to the majors.
No, it would really just be great to see him on the mound again in the big leagues. I don't even remember. I know he missed all of last year. I don't even
Yeah,
remember how much he threw in 2023. So he's a guy who you hear his name on a podcast like this, and you might just completely forgot that he existed,
yeah,
unfortunately.
right. It's like, oh, he's still in the league. Yeah,
Yeah.
surprisingly. Tony Gonsolin for the Dodgers dealing with a back issue. He did start at AAA today, and we'll see if he what his role is for the Dodgers. The Dodgers currently have an interesting situation with their rotation because they are at 5 pitchers, with Dustin May being number 5.
Mhm.
Obviously, they are preparing for the eventual situation where Shohei Ohtani starts pitching again in a couple months at this point. So, the plan is probably to go to a 6-man rotation with the talent on that team. Gonsolin probably serves as a bit of a long relief role, but it could also slot in as SB6 on that team. There's a lot to like about Gonsolin, but the problem for him, I think, has always just been injury. So coming back, being able to get that AAA rehab start is probably a good sign for him, but I am curious what his role is going to look like when he does come back to the team.
Yeah, me too. It'll be interesting to see what he gets built up to before they activate him. He's a guy who the peripherals always scare me, but he's just a great BABIP guy. Maybe he gets a lot of
Hmm.
weak contact, and the Dodgers are just great at positioning their guys. So it's never, if you're looking at projections, he's a guy who's always a little scary, but in the right matchups, especially on the Dodgers, if you're playing in a wins league, he's a guy, worth monitoring in your deeper formats.
Yeah, for sure. All right, his teammate Evan Phillips, also dealing with a shoulder injury, will start a minor league rehab assignment Thursday. We'll see how he does. Obviously, that bullpen for the Dodgers is kind of crazy right now, so I'm not sure what role Phillips will come back to. He probably will be high leverage, but the Dodgers have been kind of just not very consistent on how they're using their relievers, in the sense that like there's no one defined closer.
Mhm.
So Phillips probably enters that mix of just another option for Dave Roberts to use in high leverage situations. But he's probably more of a like a holds pickup guy rather than a guy that you would pick up in saves league. But regardless, Phillips is still one of the better relievers in the MLB when he's healthy. So seeing him being able to be back soon is probably a good thing for the Dodgers.
Yep, just adding to that crazy depth, another guy in there.
Yeah, exactly. All right, and a couple of final things. Ever Cabrera is dealing with a blister on his finger, did pitch 3 innings in AAA on Tuesday. And then Tobias Myers of the Brewers dealing with an oblique injury. He is set to begin his AAA rehab on April 8th. So other injury news, Shamanaya is dealing with a setback to his oblique injury. Kind of fortunate for the guy who probably was going to be the top pitcher for the Mets, which is a weird thing to say, but yeah, that has not worked out for them, unfortunately. Luis Garcia of the Astros shut down for 4 weeks due to elbow inflammation. A couple of pitchers for the Red Sox, Lucas Giolito and Brandon Bayo, not really close to joining the rotation. Both of them have been in some rehab stints, but nothing that would indicate that they are close to be back to the majors. Their teammate Liam Hendricks is now throwing out to 120 feet. Would be a nice addition, I think, to this Red Sox team. Obviously, they've got Aroldis Chapman there. Justin Slayton's been a name that's been getting a lot of hype in their bullpen as well. But Hendricks coming back would be a nice way to shore up their bullpen, but it's also unsure whether he's really going to have that big of an impact, I think, in that team, just because of all the injuries that he's dealt with the past couple of years.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a question mark, unfortunately. And Giolito and Bayo still seemingly a ways away. That gives a longer runway for Richard Fitz, which is really nice. He looked
Hmm.
decent in his first start, so it's going to be, hopefully we get a full month out of him to really see what he's capable of as a starter.
Yeah. Grayson Rodriguez did throw a bullpen session on Wednesday. There's still no timetable for his return to the team. Frankie Montas did also start a throwing program. He is throwing from 60 feet, but no timetable for him when he's coming back. Jack Leiter left his start on Wednesday with a blister issue. Don't know if he's going to be available for his next start just yet. Blisters are always a little bit of a weird thing to deal with as a pitcher. Zach Geloff got his cast removed on his broken hand. He is starting baseball activities. I think he's one of those really intriguing pickups if he's available because of his hit tool. But it's also I just don't know when he necessarily is coming back. But I think Geloff is a guy that you want to keep an eye on and just see if you can pick him up, especially if you need some middle infield help on your teams.
Yeah, yeah, he has a nice power speed blend, and hopefully he can benefit from a a positive offensive environment. And I don't think the Max Muncy of the A's hasn't really been tearing the cover off the ball at second base. So I think
Yeah,
that he could hopefully get that spot back once he's ready to go.
for sure. Ryan Weathers, who got a lot of hype at the beginning of this spring training, was dealing with a form issue. He has begun a throwing program. Yuri Perez, who is coming back from Tommy John, has faced hitters, so his rehab is coming back. But he's probably not going to be joining the team until mid-season anyway. So, I mean, I think good. It's good news that he is facing hitters, but I wouldn't make this as a sign that he's coming back anytime soon. Uh, Another one of the Marlins. Wow, there's a lot of Marlins on this one. Connor Norby dealing with an oblique issue. He is progressing in baseball activities. Aaron Savali is dealing with some hamstring issues. Is scheduled to throw a bullpen session, or did throw a bullpen session a couple days ago. We'll see if he is able to slot in soon as the number 5 starter for the Brewers. Clark Schmidt threw a 46 pitch, 3-inning simulated game, so he is making his way back. Ranger Suarez dealing with a back issue, could face hitters before the end of the week. Matt Brash, of course, is dealt with an elbow injury. He's close to beginning a rehab assignment in AAA. Dalton Varsho, who, interestingly enough, had some spring training appearances, but Toronto opted to keep him on the injured list. He is playing catch out to 150 feet. And then DJ Hers, who it was dealing with an elbow, got put on the 60 IL, is seeking a second opinion to see if he could probably avoid Tommy John surgery. And then one final thing that I forgot to mention, Freddie Freeman did get placed on the 10-day IL for a calf, or not for a calf, for an issue. And that is going to leave most likely Enrique Hernandez as the starting first baseman. For the Dodgers, he's already kind of been in that spot the last couple games. Pretty big blow to the Dodgers, funny enough, I guess, because Freeman's been on a tear for the first week of the season. So it's unfortunate to lose him. But yeah, the team is still absolutely stacked. So it's kind of hard to feel bad for what the Dodgers are going through right now.
Yeah, maybe it's only these mysterious ailments that can, slow them down. You got Mookie Betts losing 20 pounds from this
Yeah,
illness, and then you got Freddie Freeman falling in the shower and twisting his ankle. I mean, the Dodgers are that good that I guess, only things like this are going to be able to hold them down. Still haven't lost a game, so maybe that'll
right.
come before our next podcast. We'll see.
Yep. All right, and then in terms of transactions, big one like you mentioned, Jurickson Profar tested positive for PEDs, and he is suspended for the next 80 games. Um, this was a team that is kind of already dealing with some poor outfielder depth because of the injury to Ronald Acuna. And so currently, I think who slots in their outfield is going to be just basically Jared Kelenic, Brian De La Cruz,
Mhm.
and Michael Harris II. Profar was kind of expected to be a core part of that outfield just after his incredible breakout season last year. But yeah, he tested positive for PD, so now it's going to put a lot more pressure on guys like De La Cruz and Kelenic to perform at the bottom of the order for Atlanta.
Yeah, and ineligible for the playoffs too, I believe, which really hurts.
Yes, yeah, that's a
Although
huge
the
change.
pace the Braves are going at might not get there.
Right, exactly. One trade, Esther Ruiz got traded to the Dodgers, but immediately got sent to AAA, so there's not really much there. I think the big thing there is that the A's officially gave up on Ruiz. He was kind of a nice streamer for steals, but it looks like that is not going to be happening anytime soon. And then finally, David Bednar got optioned to AAA. Just had some pretty awful performances for the Pirates, and basically Pittsburgh said enough is enough. He had already been kind of dealing with issues the past couple seasons, but this is kind of the official, like, yeah, I think you need to work on some stuff in the minors before we can trust you as our closer. This means that Dennis Santana is currently slotted in as the closer for Pittsburgh, but that could change pretty quickly. Colin Holderman, I know, has had some hype as well around him. So I would say maybe just don't try to invest in the Pittsburgh bullpen right now. But if you are looking for some saves, Dennis Santana is probably the guy to look at.
Yeah, yeah, I think that he's going to be competent. I don't expect him to throw up a zero, every single time out there. But he's a guy who was really good in the second half of last year and has been good to start this year. So, for however long it lasts, and maybe it's only a month or two until Bednar comes back and figures it out. I do
Mhm.
think Santana's a good option and probably prefer him to someone like, Emilio Pagan in
Oh,
Cincinnati
for
or,
sure.
Halverson for the Rockies. I think that he's a cut above, the
Hmm.
riskiest closing options at least.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so that wraps up the news and notes for this pod. We are going to move into player performances. So yeah, Patrick, can you start us off with some notable performances from opening weekend?
Yeah, so absolutely the talk of opening day, it had to be Spencer Torkelson. Former number one pick, super disappointing last couple of years, fighting for a roster spot this spring. And he, hit a home run and four walks on opening day. So just an awesome way for him to start the year, especially, an offensively needy team like Detroit. It's great to see him start to emerge a little bit, and hopefully he can keep it up. But yeah, we got a hitter recap article from Ryan Amore for opening day. A torque in the road was our header for that one. And yeah, he hit 31 home runs in 2023 and just completely cratered in 2024. Couldn't stay on the major league roster. Strikeout rate went up, and he was just really struggling to be a major league hitter. And as a first base DH type, that's not you're not going to be able to last in the big leagues, regardless of what you've done in college or in the minor leagues. So it was nice to see Torkelson. He's been off to a great start this year. It wasn't just this one game. He stayed hot since then, and he's going to be playing every day now. With the Glaber Torres injury, especially, Colt Keith got bumped back over to second base, so first base is wide open for Torkelson now. So yeah, he's a guy I think who's worth monitoring in all your formats and definitely rostering in deeper formats. But what do you think about his, outlook for the rest of the year, John? Do you think that Torkelson's going to finally take the step this year?
I mean, it seems like that's the easy way to frame this, right? Like he looked absolutely horrible last year to the point where when he got sent to AAA, everyone was like, "Yeah, that's the correct move. He's not doing well." He was barely above the Mendoza line, batting 219. Like you said, that strikeout rate went up. But this season, yeah, he's been looking really good. The exit velocities have been looking pretty solid. And yeah, he is essentially forcing the Tigers to play him. Part of that, I think, is again due to that injury that you mentioned at Glaber Torres. But I think even when Glaber comes back, there's not necessarily a guarantee that Torkelson is going to be out of the lineup. I think he has fully shown that he belongs in the majors, and so yeah, I do think that he is going to be a guy to keep an eye out. If you do need first base help, I mean, he probably should be picked up already in most of your leagues, but if he is somehow still available, definitely run to get that pickup.
Yeah, yeah, I think that he's a guy. Obviously, the Tigers want him to work out, so they're going to give him every single opportunity, and especially if he's showing some growth, that's super encouraging. I don't think he's gonna, pop 35 or 40 homers just because very few people can do that in Detroit. But yeah, he could be a nice source of power. Yeah, Detroit is it's a tough place to hit, but he could be a relatively well-rounded contributor, and that would just be good to see. It's hard to see former number one picks just completely tank in the big leagues. When they're capable of so much more.
Yeah, and I think the key thing is like even though he is in Detroit and won't be able to get as much homers, like his average is going to go up.
Mhm.
And especially if you're in OBP leagues, like he is going to be incredible. So, um, yeah, Torkelson definitely a lot of promise there in all types of formats. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other guy who was the talk of opening day on the pitching side was Mackenzie Gore. He absolutely carved up the Phillies. We had Nick's SP roundup. Mackenzie Soares was our header there, and Gore went 6 innings with just one hit, no walks, 13 strikeouts, 20 whiffs, and a 39% CSW. So pretty much a masterpiece from Gore out there, and it was completely unexpected, at least for me. What we saw from Gore was a little bit something new. He kind of broke up his he was a slider last year he was throwing, but it didn't have a ton of depth, so it almost acted more like a cutter. And he showed two distinct shapes in the first outing, a cutter shape and a slider shape. And the slider, he really used it to absolutely attack lefties, and just to great effect. I think that, with Gore, it's always he's another guy who has super high pedigree and hasn't quite broken out. So we want to buy in and we want to see him thrive because he does have loud stuff, and he's always been hyped. But we just saw in his most recent outing yesterday, he took a little bit of a step back against the Blue Jays, went 5 innings, 3 earned runs, 11 base runners, and 5 strikeouts. And the cutter and slider that he really relied on relatively heavily against Philly just didn't disappear, but only like 10%, 15% usage between the two pitches against the Blue Jays. So it was a little bit puzzling, to see him turn away from that. Even with those two new shapes, he still relies pretty heavily on the fastball, curveball. That's definitely the majority of what you're going to see from Gore. But it looked like he was really starting to diversify his arsenal, which I think was going to take him a long way. So hopefully he's able to lean back into that in the future. I know that Nick, had him in the mid 40s on his most recent list update this week, and he has acknowledged, he's going to drop him back down a little bit just because maybe it was a little too much steam on Gore. He's a guy who I haven't really targeted just because I think that there's always the whip risk, but he's a really nice source of strikeouts, and usually has a decent ERA at least. So, what do you think about? Do you think Gore is a new guy or just a slightly improved version of himself for this year?
Yeah, I think the story with Gore is just like he's got incredible stuff, but the command is not always there. Right, a 48% zone rate on his four seamer in this most recent game against
Hmm.
Toronto. Compare that to a 63% zone rate against Philly. If he doesn't have that control, it's just less useful. Now, granted, his strike rate's pretty much the same between the first game and the second game, so maybe it kind of worked out for him that he wasn't pounding the zone the entire time. But yeah, the slider usage dipping down was super interesting because of how successful it was the game before, right? 23 pitches, but he had 8 whips, 6 called strikes, and then he only threw it 7 times against Toronto. So kind of weird there. I'd be curious how his next start goes in terms of just usage. Right, if this was just kind of a one-off strategy that he was thinking about against Philly, and that he's more like a guy who's going to be over 50% usage on the four seamer, like he was against Toronto. Yeah, I think he's still maybe worth a pickup. He's still probably a top 50 pitcher, but I think, like you said, there's just a lot of risk with the whip. And even though you're going to get a bunch of strikeouts with him, there's just going to be some risk with the other parts of his game.
Yeah, I think that Toronto was able to have some success by stacking a lot of righties against him, and he doesn't seem to want to work in the slider too much against opposite-handed hitters, which
Hmm.
makes sense. But he is going to have to
Right.
figure out an approach, for righties. Obviously, he's got 96 mile per hour fastball just about, which is really pumping it from the left side, and he's got that curveball that people drooled over when he was coming up, but he
Hmm.
does need a little something more. Two pitches is major league hitters are going to be able to have a lot of success against two pitches unless they're just two absolutely incredible pitches.
Right. It almost feels like he's matchup dependent, which like is weird to say about a guy who's in like the top 50 of pitchers. But it, yeah, the kind of the way his arsenal works, like he doesn't necessarily have a lot of great ways to attack righties because that changeup he just really has not used it that much, and that would normally be the pitch that you would think that he would use in those circumstances. So um, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he kind of grows from this Toronto start, and if there's like a change that we see in his next appearance.
Yeah, he's going to be a fun guy to keep tabs on this year for sure. It's going to be a roller coaster, though. I think that's just kind of the way it is with Gore. But
Yeah.
yeah, going to Friday, a couple of teams had off, given that built-in off day after the opener in case of rain out, but there was still plenty of action. One of the biggest performers on Friday on the hitting side was Eugenio Suarez. He's a guy who just continues continuing his torrid ending to last year. He's picking right where he left off. He had 2 home runs on Friday and 4 RBI. So, another multi-homer game for this guy. He's just swatting out balls. Last year, this year, same thing. And I think he just had his first hit today. There was not a home run. I want to say he's had like 5 home runs, no other hits, a zero BABIP. Super fluky. Super just weird small sample size stuff to start the season, but super productive for your fantasy teams. I mean, there's very few guys who have that many home runs so far. But yeah, he's a really streaky hitter, but third base is a little bit of a weak position. So to lock in a potential or even likely 30 homer bat in Suarez is really nice. He blasted 11 home runs last year in his hottest stretch, which was from August 23rd to September 23rd. Helped a lot of fantasy teams get carried there, including one of mine. I was super happy to have him on the team down the stretch. He wasn't great for me in the playoffs, but he was really great before that. Wish I had him on the team right now. That's for sure. Suarez, he especially in a good lineup, Arizona, he's going to rack up some RBI. He might hurt you a little bit in the batting average, but yeah, John, what do you think about Suarez this year? Do you think that he could push 35 or 40 homers, or he's a veteran? We kind of know a little bit what his ceiling is, but what are you expecting?
Yeah, so I love Eugenio Suarez.
Yeah,
The only problem is I think he's really only good in roto leagues. I just don't love him in weekly leagues because he's just so streaky, right? Like the last year, the nice thing was that his average was actually up, so he provided a good amount of offense. Also, that Arizona team was just incredible in terms of offense. But like you said, it wasn't really until the last month of the season that he really turned up the temperature and was like really really good. So the funny thing about when I look at Eugenio Suarez hitting 5 homers here is that like, well, that just means he's got 25 to spread out against the rest of the season,
right.
and that's just like it's not something I love to mainly go after. But I do think like if you are, you know, if third base is a little tough for you, right? If you've got a guy like, oh, I don't know, like maybe let's just say like Jake Berger is your third baseman,
Hmm.
or maybe you were waiting for Josh Young to come back. Like Eugenio Suarez is for sure like a really solid fill-in guy. I think the thing is you just have to accept that he is not going to really do much for you unless he's hitting homers, which is unfortunate. But maybe that Diamondbacks team is actually like again as good as offense as they were last year. Maybe you do get some more runs in RBI with that. I believe he has the league lead in RBI with 11. It's tied with a bunch of other people, but um, he is producing in more ways than just hitting homers. Um, I would love to see the average go back to where it was last season. He batted 256 last year. He's currently at 238 right now. So if that average goes up, I think he is worth playing every single day for a fantasy team.
Yeah, yeah, that would be nice, but definitely can't expect it. I do think his career mark is a good bit below that. But yeah, the Arizona, I mean, they might not be just quite as hot as they were the last couple of months of last year when you basically couldn't start a single starting pitcher against them. But I do
Yeah,
think they'll be a top 10, if not a top five offense again this year.
right. Yeah,
And then on the pitching side, one of the biggest highlights of the day of the slate was Jeffrey Springs. He threw 6 shutout innings, 3 hits, 1 walk, 9 strikeouts, 17 whiffs, and a 34% CSW. This was a really nice season debut for Springs, who he missed a good chunk of last season with the elbow surgery, and then ended up going to Oakland from Tampa Bay or Sacramento. Sorry, first Sacramento Oakland era of the podcast season for me. But
yeah,
yeah, it was nice to see Springs kick his season off this way. He's a guy who's super changeup dominant, which works because he's a lefty. He can really locate that changeup down and away really well to right-handed hitters. Despite a 90, 91 mile per hour fastball. So yeah, he's super crafty. Really interesting career path in terms of the late breakout. So it was nice to see him, kick off his season with this great outing. He did give it a little bit back though in his most recent outing, just like Mackenzie Gore. He pitched yesterday also, and he gave up, 4 earned. I think it was 5 rounds, 4 earned in 3 innings with 9 base runners against the Cubs in Sacramento. So it does seem like that park. I don't think it's going to be Coors Field, right, or a Great American, but it does seem like it's going to be a pretty tough place to pitch. So you might want to sit, most of your Oakland pitchers, or Sacramento pitchers at home. Not that you're rostering a lot of them because it is a little bit of a weak staff, but yeah, Springs 2 mixed results so far, but good to see him kick off his year on the right foot at least.
yeah. I think with Springs, it really does kind of come down to the park. Um, we don't have great Stackhouse data because it was literally 1 week of baseball, so uh, there's not much to say there. But apparently, according to Statcast, Sutter Health Park, which is the A's park in Sacramento, has a park factor of 120, which obviously is like not true.
Oh wow.
Like that's just going to come down as the season goes on. But it is in the PCL, right? It's that the PCL is a league that just notoriously this is very hitter friendly. I think I've heard some stuff that Sutter Health isn't as
Mhm.
hitter friendly as some of the other parks in the PCL, but still, it is a little bit smaller dimensions. There's not a lot of stuff that's like blocking the wind also in that area. A lot of big league fields will have like a lot of bleachers out by the outfield. Well, this is a minor league park. They just don't have that type of infrastructure. Majority of the seats are long first and third baselines. So it is probably a little bit easier for the wind to carry out all the way to the outfield for that team if the situation is right. So yeah, I'm kind of with you in that like it's a nice thing to see from Springs. Obviously, the 9 strikeouts is very good, but yeah, he's going to be susceptible to some of these games where because of his park, it's just not going to go well.
Yeah, and he is a fly ball tendencies guy too. He usually has more, higher fly ball rate than ground ball rate just because of his approach. Fastball changeup guy, usually going to generate a lot of fly balls. So he's going to need to, when he's pitching at home, make sure that a lot of that contact in the air is weak, or else we could see quite a few outings like yesterday, unfortunately. So Saturday, first weekend day of games, March 29th. It was a big day for Aaron Judge. It's been quite a few big days for Aaron Judge already. Not too much else you can say about him. But Kevin O'Brien profiled him in his hitter recap article. But I want to talk a little bit about Jordan Westburg for the Orioles. He went 4 for 5 with 2 home runs and 3 runs scored on Saturday. Both solo shots, but Westburg's off to a great start. He's a guy who's going right around top 100 in most drafts, and he's got that really nice second base, third base dual eligibility, and he's starting the year on the right foot. He, hopefully can maintain the power that we've seen and maybe even take a step forward with the Orioles moving that left field wall in a little bit. So yeah, Westburg, he's a guy that PLV really liked in terms of his hitting performance last year. So someone who we were on to start the year, and he's showing really good things so far, and hopefully it'll sustain over the whole year.
Yeah, I think the challenge, for all these young Orioles players is just, would they have playing time? But I think Westburg has solidified himself as, the guy who should be playing second base. Um, you know, when uh, when Gunnar comes back, I'm kind of curious where he ends up moving. If it probably moves to third base, right? Like
Yeah.
you'd move Holiday to second base, Gunnar's back at shortstop, and then Westburg's back at third. It's not going to change anything in terms of where he is in the lineup, but I think just getting Gunnar Henderson back can only be a good thing for Westburg in terms of yeah having probably I don't know. I don't know if you had any experience from last year of what the lineup looks like when everyone is healthy, because Westburg is currently batting third right now. I don't know if that's going to stick when Gunnar comes back.
Yeah, I guess it'll be interesting to see because they lost Santander, but replace him with O'Neill, so I think they'll hit in a
Hmm.
similar spot. I can see Westbury hitting like fifth in the order against righties, and then maybe he'll get bumped up to like second or third against lefties.
Sure.
But yeah, he'll mostly play third base, and then I think they're gonna sit Holiday against some lefties, so he'll play second base then. And yeah, just a really nice piece to have on your team. I mean, he both real life and fantasy, he kind of does everything well, but nothing exceptionally. But he's a player who, yeah, the sum of his parts just kind of carries him to like consistent, hopefully 3+ WAR seasons, and like a 25-10 type fantasy guy with good counting stats and a good offense. So I think he's kind of going to be an underrated player, maybe never a superstar, but just a really steady Eddie that's nice to have on your team.
Yeah, definitely.
And then on the pitching side, this one of the stars for Saturday was someone who got a ton of helium this draft season, and rightfully so, in my opinion. That was Spencer Schwellenbach. He went 6 scoreless innings with 1 hit and 1 walk and only 4 strikeouts, 12 whiffs, and 27% CSW. So this was a impressive outing from Schwellenbach just because he didn't have his best stuff. Nick talked about that in his write up for this day. Only 4 strikeouts, kind of shows that. But still, 6 scoreless innings. I mean, you take that every single time. And a lot of the reason why Schwellenbach is able to thrive, even when he's not, maybe dotting his pitches exactly how he wants, is because he just has such a deep arsenal. Last year, he featured 6 pitches. This year, he featured 6 pitches in his first start, at least 14% of the time. So you really can't sit on anything against this guy. And it's really impressive to me too, because I believe he's a converted shortstop, and he was playing shortstop as recently as college. So to see someone who was playing shortstop that long ago rocketed through the minors, and now he's flashing a 6 pitch arsenal at the major leagues. I mean, that is super impressive. And he's going to get the Marlins tomorrow. For that would be Friday, and I expect another gem from him.
Yeah, with Schwellenbach, I'm kind of unfortunate. I was never able to pick him up in any of my drafts. But yeah, he got a lot of helium. He was pretty solid last year too. And so there was definitely a lot of reasoning for why he was, why everyone kind of loved him. So, yeah, love to see those strikeout numbers go up more, even more. But it's like you said, sometimes you just don't have your best stuff. But even when he doesn't have it, he can still limit the offense to just one hit, one walk.
Yeah, I'd be pretty surprised if he's not able to help Atlanta get their first win tomorrow. But I guess the way
Yeah,
things have been going for them, it might just be, you never know.
right. You think against Miami, they finally have the shot. So
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Hoping for the best though. But yeah, going to Sunday to wrap up the first weekend of the season. We had Johnny Gordon on the recap article for this day that focused on Tyler Soderstrom. I kind of paired a couple of guys together for this day because they're both guys in their first full year but second year first base DH types. That's Kyle Manzardo and Tyler Soderstrom. They both had home runs on Sunday, and they both have had multiple home runs already this year. So yeah, Manzardo, he's a guy who's going to mostly DH for Cleveland, and he only has utility eligibility in some formats, which is pretty frustrating in terms of roster flexibility. But it seems like he's going to hit and he's going to play enough to still merit a spot on your team. He might sit against a couple of lefties, but not all of them. And he's going to be in there every day against righties. And it looks like he's going to hit at the top of the lineup too, around third or so. So he's a guy who, shallow formats, he might be out there, but if you already have him in your deeper leagues, I think you can just enjoy the ride. He's a super impressive prospect with a long track record of good hitting. So I think, this could be the year that he, makes full run in the major leagues and puts up a really solid line. And then for Soderstrom, he is already at 3 home runs in the year, including a couple against Seattle, against some really tough arms. So that was really impressive to see. I think he took Brian Wu and Logan Gilbert deep in opening weekend. And he came up as a catcher, but they have Langoliers back there. So they're running him out a lot at first base and DH. And he's got a great runway to playing time, and he's making the most of it right now. He's got pretty legit power, and like Sutter Health Park we were just talking about, he's going to be able to take advantage of that too. So it'd be really fun to see him push like a 30 homer season or something like that.
yeah, the unfortunate thing for Manzardo, like we discussed actually last week with your article, is that the competition for him at first base is Carlos Santana, who's a switch hitter. So he's just never going to be out in any sort of lineup unless he's getting a day of rest. So it'll be tough for Manzardo to really get first base eligibility in that sort of situation. So yeah, even though he's only DH only, if you've got 2 DH spots in your league, I think that's a good reason to pick up Manzardo. And then yeah, Soderstrom, I've got a soft spot for him. He was on my dynasty team up until this past offseason. Traded him for some other players, but he has legit power, and I think being in Sutter Health is only going to help him there. I think 30 is actually probably pretty easy for Soderstrom. I think he should get to that number. Anything after that's probably a good cherry on top. He does have, I think he has a better hit tool than Langoliers. I'm not 100% sure on that, but he's just going to get a decent amount of playing time for the A's. He's going to be in there every day at first base or DH, like you mentioned. And assuming the rest of the park plays, rest of the players on the A's play the park as well as Soderstrom does, because they've got some sneaky good power there. Yeah, I think he should be able to get to 30 homers pretty easily. Maybe 70 runs and RBIs as well. So we'll see if that works out for him.
Yeah, that would be great to see. I mean, he's still pretty young, so that would be a super impressive line. And then on Sunday Night Baseball, we had, I would say, the best pitching performance of the day, and that was from Nick Pivetta, making his Padres debut. I believe it was against the Braves at home. So Pivetta threw 7 shutout innings, only get 1 hit, no walks, 4 strikeouts, 8 whiffs, and a 29% CSW. So just an ideal start to his Padres career. Pivetta, his velo was down a little bit. I think it was, he was sitting around 92.5, about a mile per hour down from last season. But his fastball shape is still great. I mean, he's a guy who averages over 20 inches of IVB on the fastball, so it plays up super well up in the zone. And then he's able to spin a couple of breaking balls, I think sweeper curveball off of that. And, he didn't get a lot of whiffs in this game, but he does have a profile where he is able to get a lot of strikeouts. So yeah, it was just a super encouraging start for Pivetta, a guy who, has really started to have a couple of competent seasons lately after being a super disappointing pitching prospect in the beginning of his career. So he's got a tough matchup this weekend against the Cubs, who lit up Jeffrey Springs, who we just talked about. So I'm hopeful that he can kind of keep the momentum going in a difficult matchup. And crazy thing about Pivetta is he's never had a career ERA below 4, which,
Yeah.
given how long he's been around, is pretty hard to believe. But he's a guy who ERA is not his best quality on your fantasy team. He's going to have usually a pretty good whip, and the strikeouts are, definitely his carrying trait.
Yeah, I do think he's going to benefit a lot from being in San Diego, but even with all that, this it's unlikely he has a ERA below 4 just because that's just the way Pivetta works.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think he was probably a good spec ad in kind of the maybe mid to late rounds for pitching, just because you don't know exactly where you're going to get with Pivetta. Um, and yet at the same time, I think he is a guy that, like, if he's on your roster, there's no reason to drop him. Like, even if he does poorly against the Cubs, like, he still can have good matchups here and there.
Absolutely.
All right. Am I doing Monday, or do you want to do Monday?
No, Monday's all you. Go for it.
Okay, cool. All right, so moving on to Monday, thanks to Christian Ahman for the Heli De La Cruz hitter recap article. We're not going to talk about Ellie, we're actually going to talk about his teammate, Matt McLain. 2 for 3 with 4 runs, a homer, and 3 RBI. Yeah, the Reds were on fire on Monday. McLain hit a homer for basically the third straight game, and he had 4 runs, as we mentioned. He he was an interesting pickup last season. I really liked McLain, but then of course he got hurt and more or less didn't play for most of the season. But it seems like where he is in 2025 is picking right up for where he was in 2023. Uh, he could finish as like a top 5 option in the mid infield positions just because of how good his ballpark is. Especially with Ellie right behind him too, like that should help him, be able to get some pitches that he can turn on. And he again also has really good, power speed combos. He has 3 homers and a stolen base already this season, and he should be continuing to run as the year goes along.
Yeah, McLean's a super fun guy. I had him in a keeper format, and I kept him last year, and then he got hurt between the keeper deadline and the draft. So just an absolute
Yeah,
bad beat. So I'm hopeful that he's able to bounce back, and it's a super fun 1-2 punch up there for the Reds. So yeah, he's
hmm
a great, kind of similar to Westburg. Probably a little bit more fantasy juice than Westburg, but another very well-rounded, ball player who does everything, well, and then also has some good positional versatility too.
yeah. All right, moving on to pitchers. Thanks to Nick for the Hicks are for bids SP roundup article. We're starting with Jordan Hicks, the Giants. 6 innings, 1 hit, no earned runs, 2 walks, 6 strikeouts. He did this through 7 whiffs, 36% CSW, 72 pitches. I think with Hicks, it was weird because last season, obviously, he made the transition to be a starter. That's what San Francisco signed him for. He was like okay at beginning of the season, but then San Francisco like pushed him into the bullpen by the latter half of the season, and he just didn't know if he's going to start again. But I think the big thing here was that his velo went up, almost up a whole tick from last year on his sinker. Um, the thing with Hicks, I think, which Nick pointed out, is if as soon as that velo drops, it's probably just not going to be very good for Hicks.
Hmm.
We'll see how that works for him. It's something to track. I think he's still worth picking up. He's got to start this weekend against the Mariners. That should go pretty well, especially in San Francisco. The only problem is that his next start after facing the Mariners is the Yankees in Yankee Stadium. So he's a guy who you'll pick up probably for that start, and then you probably don't want to pick him up for the start after that, even with the higher velo. So yeah, we'll see how well Jordan Hicks does in that Mariners start, because I think it will, if the velo sticks, right, if it's not just like an opening day sort of like excitement thing, or first start of the season excitement thing, maybe Hicks is actually some guy that we can rely on for the next couple months.
Right, and I guess that's the tough thing with the guy like him is he is kind of super inconsistent with the velocity, and it was almost like he was a completely different pitcher in his first start of the year than what we saw last year. So he wasn't a guy I was interested in like at all going into the season. And then you see that he's, throwing 3-4 miles per hour harder, touching 100. He becomes basically one of the hardest throwing starting pitchers in baseball when he's doing that. And
Yeah.
yeah, he's doesn't have swing and miss stuff, but he has great stuff that he's gonna steal strikes with and get ground balls, sinker sweeper mix. So yeah, it was super cool to see that, just because when I heard, San Francisco signs him last year, they say they're going to make him a starter. You're a little skeptical. It doesn't look great. So you have low expectations, and then he shows you what he is capable of. So it was cool to at least, see the ceiling, and we'll see how long it lasts.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the key, right? How long does this last? Because it's just going to be hard to sustain that velo bump for the entire season.
Definitely.
All right, moving on to Tuesday. Thanks to Scott McDermott for the Wyatt Riot hitter recap article. We are starting off with Wyatt Langford, 2 for 4 with a homer, a run, and an RBI. He was an interesting pickup in drafts this year. I think managers didn't really know what to do with Langford. Right, for the bulk of the season in 2024, he wasn't that good, but his performance in September showed that there was something there. He got 8 homers, had 7 steals, slash 300, 386, 610, which is incredible numbers. Of course, when you take that step back, that 2024 season in general just wasn't that great because of how good that September was. It just didn't translate to the rest of the season. His rolling 14-day ADP on NFBC settled at 38, just as drafts were closing up the past few weeks, which kind of speaks to how much managers like really believe in the ceiling for him. On Monday, he repaid a little bit of that trust, hit a first inning homer, short off the power with a couple more fly balls out to the warning track. And yeah, Scott highlighted Langford's batted ball metrics in the hitting recap, so I definitely recommend checking that out. And the other name to talk about, Jordan Walker of the Cardinals, 2 for 3 with a homer, a run, 2 RBIs, and a stolen base. It really feels like we've been waiting for the Jordan Walker breakout for years. And honestly, it's because we have been waiting so many years. He forced the Cards to put him in the starting lineup in 2023, had a really good spring training. But that's really where the good story ends, as he really failed to make any notable impact when he was in the majors. He was bouncing back and forth between AAA and the 2024, he was basically in AAA for the majority of the season, I think. He did start 2025 really well so far. Granted, it's only been 22 plate appearances. But this Monday, he hit the first homer of the season, also stole his first base, and he's only 23. So there's plenty of time for him to grow into the player that we can all hope he can be.
Yes, I unfortunately had Jordan Walker on the bench for this combo meal, which was a little bit of a bummer, but it's nice to see him having games like this. He's only 22, it's his age 23 season, right? He's going to turn 23 in a month or two, but you can't quit on a guy who had all this pedigree and is still only 22 years old. It's not like it's Joe Adele who's had 3 or 4 chances and hasn't gotten it done. Walker, this is kind of the make or break year because St. Louis doesn't seem like they're really contending. So he's going to get that full run, and I'm hoping that he can take advantage of it. And he's gotten himself off to a good start. That's for sure.
Yeah. All right, thanks to Nick Pollock for the Eov moment. As we round up articles, we move on to pitchers. We're going to start with Shane Baz of the Rays. Got a win against Pittsburgh, 6 innings with no earned runs, 7 hits, no walks, and 10 strikeouts. The big thing here was that Baz velocity jumped up to 97 miles an hour, tick and a half higher than where he was last season. And that curve that we saw last year was really, really solid this time around, 53% CSW. The slider wasn't that great, only a 47% strikeout. The changeup was a little bit of an easy target for left-hand batters. But honestly, being able to have that high velocity and that curveball is really solid. Baz is probably a guy who, if you don't have him already, I think you should pick him up if he's available. And he's one of those guys where I think it's going to be interesting how Tampa Bay deals with being in George Steinbrenner Field, right? The dimensions just aren't that great compared to the Trop. But I think Baz has the skills and the stuff to be able to limit hits in that sort of park. So we'll see how that works for him. And then moving on to Sandy Alcantara, got the win against the Mets. 5 innings, 2 earned runs, 3 hits, no walks, 4 strikeouts. Big thing here was that he only had 70 pitches this time around. He was sitting a little bit lower on his fastball, 95-96, instead of being up at 97-98 like he was in his first start. But he kind of mentioned that, coming back from injury, he just needs a little bit more time than usual to recover, which isn't the thing you love to hear from a pitcher, but he is coming back from Tommy John, so there's that. The big change here was that he was showing off a curveball coming in at 86 miles an hour, which is a little different than the slider that he had that was coming a couple ticks higher. 50% strike rate, so not like incredible, but it was really good in terms of being able to be a different offering for him compared to his other stuff. Right, it's not as fast as the slider, so having a different velocity band for him, just being able to mix in something new, I think is really good to see. And yeah, we'll see how that goes for him as the season goes on. Is this just a one-time thing with this curveball? Is it just a slider that was identified in Statcast. We'll see, but yeah, Sandy Alcantara is still upgrading his arsenal, which is insane. Um, yeah, but both these guys, I think, are guys that I would love to have on fantasy teams. Boz is definitely probably available in some of your leagues. Sandy for sure is already drafted, so you have no hope for getting him except for a trade. But yeah, both these guys are hoping to be really good contributors this season.
Yeah, yeah, Boz, I would say only in your shallower formats might he be available, but if he is, definitely go grab him. He's, when he came up, I can't remember if it was 22 or 23, but he was one of the most highly touted pitching prospects in recent memory. He didn't have Paul Skeens level hype, but definitely on par with like Yuri Perez and Grayson Rodriguez. I mean, he was that highly thought of. So it's nice to see him regain some of that form here. These are two guys who, if you have them on your teams, I would say keep very close track of their velocity. Obviously, it matters how hard every pitcher is throwing. You don't want to see steep drops or anything, but Boz, this jump, if he can sustain that, he's going to be working towards ace type upside. And with Sandy, if his velo's down, I wouldn't be surprised if the Marlins, shorten his outings or put him on the IL, because it does seem like their goal is to probably trade him. So
Yep.
they're going to want to keep his trade value, at a peak to maximize that return. So, enjoy these guys because they're both really good pitchers, but also keep a close eye on, their game to game velocity and performance.
For sure. All right, moving on to Wednesday. Thanks to Kyle Stansel for the Ivan the Great hitter recap article. We are starting with Ivan Herrera, St. Louis, 3 for 5 with 3 homers, 3 runs, 6 RBI. Yeah, this is a little convenient for the Cardinals that as soon as Yadier Molina retires, they've got a guy who is incredible. Yeah, he got 3 home runs on Wednesday, as we mentioned, helping St. Louis get to 4-2 with blowing out the Angels at 12-5. All three of them were real homers. They had exit velocities over 100 miles an hour. They weren't just wall scrapers. And yeah, his last homer was 425 feet. So the power was still there the entire night. He had a really good season last year, slash 301, 372, 428 in about half a season, 259 plate appearances. Had okay walk rates and strikeout rates, 9.7% walk rate, 20.5% strikeout rate. And I think that's indicative of what his minors performance looks like. He always has had good strikeout to walk ratios in the minors. 2021 is when he had his best season, with 17 homers and 437 plate appearances. So there is some power in his pedigree. So it looks like Ivan Herrera is going to be the catcher for the time being for the Cardinals. Like you mentioned with Jordan Walker, this isn't necessarily a team that's like looking to compete. So they're not going to really try to go hard and find a replacement catcher if Herrera starts to slump a little bit. But I think this game was proof that like, hey, he's got some power in him. We'll see. Obviously, he's not going to have 3 homers every single game, but he is a guy who's capable of doing that, which, yeah, you really, really like to see from that position. And then Seiya Suzuki of the Cubs, 3 for 5 with 2 homers, 2 runs, 5 RBI, and a walk. If it wasn't for Ivan Herrera's career day, everyone probably would have been talking about Seiya because he totaled a career high. Excuse me. Because he totaled a career high 5 RBI in the Cubs 10-2 rout of the Athletics, as we talked about with Jeffrey Springs. He is now tied for the league lead in RBI with 11, tied with his teammate Kyle Tucker. And honestly, having Kyle Tucker right behind him in the lineup is just really good for Seiya. So it's going to be exciting to see how his season goes with that offense, just a little bit more revamped and a little bit more firepower.
Yeah, the Cubs could be a really tough matchup. I mean, they've got, Matt Shaw, Dansby Swanson in the middle of the, middle bottom third of the order to kind of help extend things. So they could put up a lot of runs. With Herrera, yeah, I mean, I like Herrera. He's a very good, well-rounded hitter, in terms of he keeps a decent batting average, especially for a catcher, and he's got good plate skills. But I was not expecting him to go out and have a 3 homer game. So in some shallower formats, I'm sure people scoop them up. Hopefully, you're able to get some juice out of him. I don't think he's gonna, be a 20 to 25 homer bat, but I do think that he's a good back end catcher in your shallower leagues. And then obviously in your 2 catcher leagues, you had him locked in and you were able to get that from your catcher, which is just absolutely huge.
Yeah, I just drafted an 11-teamer auction draft last Saturday, and Herrera like basically went untouched, which like makes
Hmm.
sense. Like he's not a guy that like maybe you're taking over JT Real Muto or something like that. But with just how Real Muto has been playing this season, like those back of those catchers who are like catcher 11, catcher 10, catcher 12. Like Herrera has some interesting makeup to him that like he probably should be taking over those guys.
Right. Don't have to worry about competing with Wilson Contreras anymore, so he should get
Yes,
a lot of ABs.
absolutely. All right, moving on to pitchers. Thanks to Nick Pollock for the Let's Have a Roupp Chat SP Roundup article. A guy who had a lot of helium, I think, with basically the last week of spring training, Landen Roupp. Giants pitcher went up against Houston in the no decision, 4 innings, 3 runs, 4 hits, 4 walks, and 8 strikeouts. That line probably doesn't look that good, but it was actually a really good start up until Roupp came in for the fifth. He had only given up 1 run and walked 2 batters in those 4 innings, but then it all kind of fell apart in that fifth. His curveball was really good, getting 11 whiffs on the Astros, while his main fastball, the sinker, has 3 feet of separation between
Mm.
his curveball and his sinker, which is insane. I think the question is whether he can actually be sustainable like this with only 2 pitches. He does have a changeup that he uses occasionally well. I think it was at like 18% usage last season. He's only rostered in 11% of leagues on Yahoo, 4% on ESPN. And I think he should be a pickup for when his next Red starts. When his next start, when the Reds come to town. And then I hate to do this to you, but Garrett Crochet of the Red Sox going up against, of course, your Orioles. You saw this start in person. 8 innings, no 1 runs, 4 hits, 1 walk, 8 strikeouts. Yeah, the 4-seamer cutter were amazing, but he was getting whiffs on the changeup too, which is cool. Unsure whether he's going to continue using that, but Crochet is, yeah, they're to stay in Boston. I think they really like him. Realistically, they actually didn't really give up that much for him. You know, Kyle Teal's like a big prospect, but I think with what Crochet provided them, like that deal was just like such a win for Boston, and seeing him shove like this is yeah, pretty incredible.
Yeah, yeah. The Orioles stacked the lineup with righties against him. I think Mullins was the only lefty in there, and Crochet pretty much mowed him down. Only one free pass, and he was first time through the order, really just pumping a lot of fastballs and sweepers. And then as he got later into the game, he did a great job kind of diversifying the looks that he was giving guys and mixing up his mixing in other pitches, change up, cutter, things like that. So yeah, it was a super impressive start. And then with Roupp, he's a super unique arm. He has that low slot, a lot of horizontal movement, gives a really unique look. He's going to be, I think, a decent home streamer in your shallower leagues, and then should be, kept on your roster in deeper leagues. I do worry a little bit if you're playing like some quality starts leagues like I do. I don't think he's going to be a great source of those, just because you know how the Giants are. They like to lean on their bullpen a lot, and he's a guy who does have a little bit of a limited arsenal, so he might not be going through the order a third time very much. But he should be a pretty good source of strikeouts, and yeah, a reliable guy over 5 innings to expect good results, provided that he's able to rein in the walks a little bit.
Yeah, I think the thing with Roupp too is that there really isn't like a ton of competition for his spot. I mean, he did beat out Kyle Harrison and Keaton Wynn for that spot,
Hmm.
but Jordan Wicks is also on the team. Like he could get moved to the bullpen at any point this season. It's a team where the pitching, really, if you just look at the names, isn't like gonna wow you or anything, but it is a staff that I think Roupp probably sticks around for a while until like he has like a really bad outing, and then maybe they're like, we'll give Kyle Harrison a look. But yeah, like what you said, I think their bullpen probably limits his ability to get quality starts. Right, they have really 3 really solid guys in Ryan Walker, Camilo Duvall, Tyler Rogers. But then the rest of their bullpen is still pretty solid that they can bridge the gap
Hmm.
between the fifth inning and then the end of the game.
Yeah, yeah. Roupp is, he might have a little competition from Birdsong, but we'll see on that. I honestly expected Roupp to keep his rotation spot longer than Hicks, but then Hicks went out and did what he did in his first start. So Roupp is definitely the SP5 at this point, but hopefully he can
Right.
hold on to it.
Yep. And he has the option, so of course he's the easiest one to move down to the minors if the Giants need to make a change.
Hmm.
All right, that wraps it up for the player performance recaps. We are going to talk about streamers for the next week, and we've got 3 very interesting names here. First one, Landon Roupp, like we already mentioned. Don't really need to talk much about him, but he does get the Reds in Oracle Park. Cincy was the 5th worst team in terms of WRC plus when away in 2024. So even if you think that home away splits are kind of random, I think it's still an opportunity for Roupp to take advantage of a free swinging team. The Oracle Park is a great park for pitchers, and I think with Cincy just being not great on the road, I think this is a good opportunity to pick him up. I'm just going to check quick when he starts. Roupp is going to go on Tuesday against Cincy. The challenge for him is he doesn't have a great set of starts afterwards. So he's probably only worth picking up for that one start and then dropping, especially if you're in a shallower league. But he could be a really good source of a streaming win there. And then Ben Lively of the Guardian, 7% rostered on Yahoo, 2% on ESPN. Again, he's not likely the next great ace out of Cleveland, but he is pretty serviceable. I think if you're looking for a guy who can get you a win and a few strikeouts, he gets a beautiful matchup against the White Sox on Wednesday. Now, the White Sox have been a little dangerous against my Twins, but I just chalk that up to being the Twins being an awful baseball team. And so I think the White Sox are pretty terrible still. And I think if you're okay with like 5 innings, 3 to 4 strikeouts, probably a win in this one, I think Lively will do that just for you. Obviously, it's a little bit of an earlier week stream in Wednesday, but if your pitching staff just needs a little bit of a bump, I think Lively is an interesting option here. And then a guy for the really deep leagues, Kyle Hart, who's pitching for the Red Hot Padres. He gets to face Colorado in Petco next Saturday. I don't really know much about Kyle Hart other than that his previous start was like okay. He went 5 innings with 4 strikeouts, getting the win against Cleveland. And again, this is more of he is facing a bad team in the Rockies who are playing away from Coors. So if you're in a deep league looking for a streamer, I think Hart might be a good option for you.
Yeah, those are good. Those are good calls. I hope that Lively doesn't put up a Chris Paddock type line. I had to eat that one in a couple of my leagues, unfortunately. So that was tough. Would throw one bonus one in there, which would be Mitchell Parker. He gets Miami next weekend. I believe it should be Friday. He's facing Arizona this weekend, so definitely would not add him before that. And, see how it goes. Make sure he doesn't at least completely blow up. But yeah, the Marlins are going to be Marlins and White Sox, Rockies on the road, always Pirates too, always great teams to target throughout the year until they prove otherwise.
Right, yeah. And maybe in a couple weeks we'll be saying Atlanta as well. But we'll wait to see how that team looks when everyone is back from injury. They can't be 0-7 forever. So
no.
Yeah, all right. Well, that wraps it up for the first regular season podcasts for the 2025 season. Again, you can find us at This Week PL on Twitter. You can send us your comments and questions at thisweekplpod@gmail.com. You can find myself on Twitter at TheJohnK and Patrick at PFitzgerald_99. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Pitcher List podcast feed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever else you listen to your podcasts. Leave a 5-star review if you enjoy the show. And lastly, sign up for Pitcher List Pro. By doing so, you can join us on the Pitcher List Discord, get advice from all the fantasy experts and writers over there. And yeah, that is going to be all for this week. We'll be back next week with another episode of This Week in Fantasy Baseball. For Patrick, I'm John, and we'll see you in the next one. Later, everyone.